the other one, you bastard!
It seems like the last 3 videos I've produced have been somewhat negative. I think it might be time to balance that out a bit with a rather positive video. By reviewing a Power of the Primes figure! Well, it's been a few weeks, but I still think that the Netflix show is within fandom public consciousness. The show itself may have been deeply disappointing, as seen in my big fat 30-minute analysis, but at the very least, the toys were quite good. Well, mostly. However, with the announcement of Wave 2, things have been somewhat mixed. The majority of the toys seem pretty pointless, considering that they are just re-releases of existing toys that are still currently on shelves, except with worse paint jobs, although that doesn't really apply to Impactor in Australia because Impactor never got properly released, so, you know, at least Aussies will finally get a chance to have him. And that's not to say that Wave 1 didn't have those instances, but there are only 2 of them compared to the other several figures. And don't get me wrong, Soundwave is absolutely lush, I'm totally getting him, not because he's more G1, but because he doesn't turn into absolutely nothing. But Optimus Prime is somewhat confusing, like, they're actually able to release him without the trailer. I thought the engineering was too complex to release in the general Voyager price point, and the trailer kind of made up for that, but, whatever, and I guess if you enjoy shitty battle masters that turn into ramps, then go ahead. And then we get to Elita 1. Already RC is receiving massive backlash, even from the G1 community, not as much as the Masterpiece version, but still quite a bit of backlash. On top of the already awful kibble and lackluster transformation, now you've got to contend with a lackluster alt mode with no paint, and painted thighs that I have a feeling are going to be very chippable. Now don't get me wrong, a lot of these things could be changed from the initial prototypes, but considering these initial prototypes have already reached the hands of several reviewers, yeah, I'm not that confident. So yeah, she's a piece of shit, and I'm definitely not getting her, but it's not like there's any alternatives, right? Well, greetings Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Power of the Primes, Voyager Class, Elita 1. Okay, so back in the long past year of 2018, I never actually wanted to get Elita 1. I was more in the markets for hunger, but at the time I was really into purchasing figures from TF Source, and as such my only option was to purchase them as a 2-pack. Given the exchange rate back then, it was still relatively cheaper in the long run, and I was still somewhat intrigued in how well the mold actually turned out. Only because the Starscream version was absolutely vilified by the fandom. Partially because it was shit, partially because this incarnation was still tied in some shape or form to the abysmal Prime Wars Mishima show. But putting that aside, I eventually received her in a big stacked order, and my thoughts back then remain oddly the same to those that I have now. In vehicle mode, honestly, yeah, there are a lot of issues, but I can't really call this thing bad. Matter of fact, I actually quite like what they've done here. At the very least, I can see what they were trying to do, unlike other examples of good ideas with wonky executions. I can appreciate what the end result was supposed to be. From a design perspective, there's actually a lot I quite like. The overall shape of the jet is quite stunning. Honestly, when you consider Elita 1's character, this is surprisingly a good fit. It's got a powerful silhouette to it, yet it seems sharp and precise towards the nose cone. Well, at least it feels sharp. In terms of actual sculpting, the nose cone has been rounded off for obvious safety reasons, but that doesn't make the nose cone section look bad. I mean, it could be a little smaller, but it is quite nice. I also really like the decision to hollow out certain sections of the wings. It's not just on the tops, but also the front sections, mimicking Cybertronian turbines. Overall, this jet is giving me massive Macross vibes, despite the fact I've never actually seen the show. I've borrowed the DVD box set from a friend, but I've yet to actually see it. It's a matter of time. I can't keep making these videos and watch everything there is to watch. Something's gotta give. Now at the front, the cockpit does open to fit either an Enigma combination or a Prime Master gimmick piece. I'll be honest with you, this functionality was always stupid. It's essentially a half-assed version of the Titan Master gimmick tied to an incredible downgrade from the Titan Masters. Seriously, these things really aren't good. The cavity there also seems to be pretty half-assed, considering the hollowness around the actual port. Full disclosure though, I don't actually know where the original Enigma is, so I'm just using a Matrix piece. Same difference though. Matter of fact, just to get this out of the way, I can't seem to find any of the original accessories. To be fair though, the feet she came with sucked, although let's be fair, what's new? And the guns she had were so tiny that I'm 99% sure I left them at a friend's house. Putting that aside though, at least the cockpit remains inconspicuous even with that functionality. I would have preferred a seating area like in Titan's Return, but considering how many examples implemented the gimmick poorly overall in this line, I'll take it. This is something that's easily ignored. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the 2 main areas. Flip it over and oh sweet Jesus, what has happened here? Like, this is not a Voyager transformation. This is a Legends transformation. This is honestly worse than the Thrilling 30 Seeker mold. Upon first look, incredible yikes. However, when you consider the circumstances that this mold has to deal with, some of it does start to make sense. Firstly, this is a Fembot mold. Already you're going to have issues with translating a slender design into a chunkier alt mode. Yes, this is a jet, but this is 2018, not 2020. Even to this day, Hasbro is still having trouble getting Fembots to work in plastic form. Part of it's the insistence on making them slender, whether to satisfy a deeply archaic understanding of female anatomy, or whether to satisfy ridiculous flawless G1 accuracy. But if given the option of a compromised alt mode or a compromised robot mode, the former seems much more justified. Secondly, this is a combiner, and as such is categorically a triple changer. Especially with aerial members of this subclass of robots, you have to give a bunch of leeway. Even for the time, this wasn't anything new. Just take a look at Silverbolt. He has an almost equal undercarriage. Did he receive the same complaints? No, and I think that's for two reasons. One is that he actually had a toy back in 1986, so longtime fans have a point of reference. Outside of Collectors Club exclusives, this is Elita's debut into plastic form. I feel more leeway needs to be given to this than her Netflix counterpart, which, like, I don't get how this turned out so bad. Secondly, many people purchasing her had no initial plans to make her a proper combiner. I mean, yeah, these days you've got the advent of Orither, so it's clear that there are now a good chunk of people that do, but back then they were taking her between two specific modes, as opposed to three. So yeah, for the most part I feel this alt mode is treated way too harshly, and some concessions need to be made. For me though, those concessions stop at two particular points. Firstly, the feet. These are way too chunky and massively ruin the profile, even considering the undercarriage. Silverbolt was able to circumvent this, so honestly I feel these have no excuse. Second, the landing gear. I honestly have no idea how the they fucks up the landing gear. This is literally the easiest element of any jet mode to get right. This annoys me the most out of any flaw of the figure. Had they got this right, I might have even awarded a whole extra point for the final score, but nope, this is just awful. And aside from the carriage, there is one other unfortunate element that you have to contend with. Yes, like all other Power of the Primes voyages, many mechanical details are not painted, but rather supplied through the use of factory-applied stickers. This actually began in Titan's Return, however it only affected half of the figures at the time. It was in full force by the time 2018 rolled around though, and there's a reason why you don't see it in Siege. The fandom was pissed, and rightfully so. This cost-cutting method is an awful decision. Granted, I don't think Elita 1 presents the worst example of such. The actual stickers themselves are designed quite well, and none of the details displayed on them try to mimic 3D tooling, as was the case with Starscream. And even then, I don't mind the concept of stickers themselves. I actually really like them when done right, but in this instance, and in every instance in Power of the Primes, they just aren't. There are two main reasons why this is the case. First off, they are factory applied. Had they kept them on a sticker sheet, fans could avoid the bleed and the messy applications. Right out of the box, the application is so sloppy. It would have actually been cheaper just to include a sticker sheet, much like the G1 reissues. Kids can easily apply them. LEGO does this all the time. Unfortunately, there's another issue with them though, the actual quality of the stickers themselves. These foil stickers are incredibly thin, and the actual print quality, although it looks great in certain areas, is just the worst. These things will slowly tear, and when they do, you can't just use glue to reapply them, as once this starts to happen, they crumple beyond repair. It's actually a persistent thing that can even be seen with the recent reissues that Walmart has released. For the reissue version of Astro Train, I had to replace the con symbols with repro labels because I couldn't reapply them. Once they're on, that's it. They'll get ruined otherwise. Literally, the only other solution is to replace them entirely with repro labels. Although honestly, in this case, I feel the design is far inferior to the original intent. The deco designers did a lovely job with the mechanical detail, whereas repro labels went with a flat pink for some reason. Honestly, I don't get it, but unfortunately this is the only option for me going forward. It's even sadder when you see tamper graphs on the tail fins. The rest of the figure could have easily been made to look this pristine. Still, despite all of that, I actually really like this alt mode. Yes, I know I ragged on a lot about what's wrong with this figure, and believe me, there's a lot that is. But even in spite of all that, I find the general design really strong. Not only is it really fitting for the character herself, to the point where I honestly think Starscream was a pre-tool designed later in production, but it's also a really well-designed jet on its own. Stickers and underkibble aside, there are moments of brilliance, such as the panels detailed towards the back and the tiny sculpted lasers on top. I'm sure that if this design was released in a different time without the combining gimmick, this jet mode would have been top-notch. Hell, in spite of the abundance of pink, maybe the repro labels will make this top-notch. Let's be honest, a combiner from the Prime Wars trilogy, upgrades are practically mandatory. We are spoiled for choice in recent years, in spite of some recent fuck-ups. And looking back, yeah, the jet mode isn't that bad. It's also quite well sized, providing an authoritative undertone when placed next to other figures. But in this instance, the real reason why I like this figure isn't the jet mode. In fact, let's move along so that we can get to that reason right now. So if you take Elita 1 and you turn her upside down, looking at the underkibble, yeah, you can pretty much tell how she's going to transform, but that in itself isn't a bad thing. The most sturdy combiners, and yes, unfortunately Elita 1 is a combiner, have very simple engineering, but it's not bad engineering in any way, just like this case. I mean, if it was just a lesser undercarriage, it would have been fine. Doesn't matter what the aesthetic is, simple can work, and in this case I think it does. First thing you want to do is untab these panels from here and move them to the front, which will disengage the nose cone in the process, I suppose. I guess it's just stuck in there like so, and also you bring in the landing gear there so it can fold up in the backpack. You can then come around to the side and untab the wings and pull them up like so. You then use this double hinge and bring this into place, and it actually pegs down into place. Then you've got the double hinges here and everything kind of locks into place like so, and you got your backpack, woohoo! You can also bring the panels down here to kind of flesh it out. You then just grab the legs and kind of pull them out like so. Separate them if you haven't already, and before you plug anything into place, you just want to lock the legs like so. Then you bring up the panel on the side here and peg it into the side there. If you don't, you're just going to end up with things looking very wobbly indeed. You come to the feet and you bring them down like that. They're locked into place and they just kind of click down. And this is actually kind of cool. You take this entire backpack section and rotate it 180 degrees and it locks into place there. Not bad for a bunch of shell. They could have just left it in one position, but I suppose it helps the combined mode as well. Anyway, the arms should have disengaged, so you just kind of click them out. And you also need to unclick them forward because these are actually locked into place and they come forward a little bit. And last but not least, of course, you bring the head around 180 degrees. Actually, wait, really last step, you bring back the fins on the side. Now, I'm not going to pretend this is the most crazy, interesting transformation in the world, but I'm not going to pretend it's bad either. It's perfectly fine. It's fun. Yeah, it's a backpack former, but a lot of fembots are backpack formers. And at the very least, the aesthetic is very different, which I'll get to in a moment. But for what we have here, yeah, it's pretty good. Okay, so the jet mode had its fair share of issues, but as far as the robot mode goes, yeah, this is actually quite good. It's not exactly the best voyage of the line. Well, maybe it actually is by default, excluding Combiner Wars redecos, but it's still done to a well beyond satisfactory degree. Like, for all the faults prior, the end result is categorically one of the better fembot robot modes we've had, recently or otherwise. For starters, check out that head sculpt. Yeah, it's a bit stoic, but the sculpt work is really well done. Essentially, they've taken the rather stupid cartoon design with her giant cardboard cutouts surrounding her head and translated it into a more streamlined helmet. The detail is far crisper, the shape is overall rounded, and the torch, at least I think it's a torch, has been made much more pronounced. This actually looks like the kind of head sculpt that would realistically exist on a Transformer, as opposed to a rush job made for a cartoon on a low budget. Had they gone for the original cartoon design, it probably would have ended up like one of the shitty Fun Pub heads. Not one of the ones I own specifically, but you look at some of their later entries and you'll see what I mean. The remaining sculpted detail is also done remarkably well. I should probably go into the arms, as surprisingly this is what puts most people off the mold. As you can see, she's got fairly normal arms with some rather bulky kibble on the outside. Honestly, it looks fine, and this remains the common consensus around those who own her. The problem is that the original release, which I still think was designed after Elita 1, interpreted this as a full Popeye style arm. Like, seriously, this is a terrible design. I get that they have to become thighs, but none of the other combiners had this issue, and let's be honest, in the end they don't look much better than those attempts. Both examples end up being awfully spindly. That aside, many people saw those attempts and saw this and thought they were exactly the same. Let me clarify this right now. They really aren't. One's an abomination, one's a genuine design choice. And hey, it's not like it doesn't fit with the rest of the aesthetic either. Since you have a few bulky sections over a rather feminine body, those small armor pieces do a great job of tying everything together. Like, take a look at these bulky legs. They're not sculpted poorly or anything, but they definitely do look a bit large in comparison to the thighs. This would hypothetically be an issue, but when juxtaposed with the arm armor, it really doesn't seem so bad. The tooling is smart, using some of the limitations of having to fit in a combined mode in a clever way. Granted, said combined mode isn't worth it, but restrictions were put on this figure, and it was able to work around them. One thing I'll give them a lot of credit for is the way the backpack is done. Yes, there are a lot of parts here, but they actually fold up quite well. The amount of parts here is comparable to the likes of Windblade, however, I feel that somehow it's done a lot better here. Maybe it's because the wings have a very unique shape to it, but it really works. Sure, it's not as well done as some of the cases you'd see today, but it's still quite nice. In fact, given the time that this was released, there are only two elements I can really take fault with. The first is, again, those stickers. I know I've already complained about them at length, but in the case of the arms, I honestly think they're way worse. I haven't even been that rough with the pieces either. Granted, I haven't been the most careful. For example, this paint chip is entirely my fault, as I dropped the figure at some stage, but the paint is durable under most circumstances. But in the case of the forearms, I've been incredibly careful, and, well, look at it. And two, these feet are way too far forward. I get that it has to use the combiner port, but this wasn't an issue with any of the other Voyager torsos. The rest of the leg is pretty damn good, with some lovely tamper grafts, and paint done so well you can barely tell it's paint to begin with. But all of that's just ruined by these goddamn clown shoes. I really wish someone made an upgrade kit to replace the leg assembly, but given the existence of an inferior newer version, I think most people simply don't care at this point. But aside from those small issues, she's a really nice looking figure. I mean, yeah, I could nitpick about the somewhat jarring white strip on her chest. That juts out a little bit, but that's not a genuine criticism, that's just personal bias. And as far as the robot mode is concerned, we have a truly wonderful representation of the character. And even beyond that, it's just a really well done robot mode in general. Typically, I go over good toy design over representation of characters, although I do have a little bit of bias in this instance. Still though, I believe they've done a bang-up job. The articulation is also pretty serviceable, being about average for the time period. I've got to give credit to the head ball joint for being incredibly expressive. Had the face sculpt been more expressive in general, you could have gotten much more personality out of the figure, but as it is, it's still good. I do find it a little disappointing that the shoulders are ratcheted and the hips aren't, but considering the combining function, I do understand why they did it. And hey, it's ratcheted incredibly smoothly. As far as I can tell, these aren't faux ratchets. The knees can also be a little annoying, annoying if you ham-fist them as they tend to fall apart, but as long as you're delicate with them, you shouldn't have any issues. In the end, it's average for the time, and as a pre-war for Cybertron figure, it's perfectly acceptable. Personally, I would have loved to see a waist swivel, but considering all the junk she has in her torso for the combined mode, I don't really think that's possible. And in terms of size, she's actually quite chunky for a Voyager. I really like this. I wish Hasbro would do more fembots in this style outside of Cyberverse. Seriously, watch seasons 2 and 3 of Cyberverse, they're awesome. I mean, a lot of the current fembots being released are done quite well, with some obvious exceptions, but I really would like to see some variation in body types, although I guess that's what third party is for. Can't wait for her to show up. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on how to transform her into combined mode. Firstly, for the sake of timing in this video, I don't want to drag this hopefully simple review out for too long. And secondly, well, look at this shit. This is just awful. Like, it's not the absolute worst combined mode I've seen in the whole line because yeesh and double yeesh, but seriously, this is bad. But not surprisingly bad. There's a reason many consider Power of the Primes to be one of the worst lines in recent memory. It's as if the line was unbelievably cursed in every aspect. There are some standouts such as Predaking, Slash, and Punch Counterpunch, but looking at other elements, everything at least had one glaring issue. Prime Masters essentially took the amazing Titan Master concept and dumbed it down into an overly simplified generic Target Master system, which itself was done way better in Siege. Most of the new legends were either somewhat generic or half-baked, to the point where their gimmick was tragically discarded by the next line, even if the result was much better.
I've seen enough. Put on some clothes.
You can't force a Nord to wear pants he hasn't asked for.
Actually, I'd like some pants.
Oh, no, you don't.
Excellent. Here, put it to good use.
Stop! Damn you! You've ruined our summer picnic! No! Not again!
They gave us one of the worst fembot molds, and yet the fandom ate it up so much that they kept retooling and redecoing it until Takara finally figured out a way to fix the damn thing. Admittedly, most of the deluxes were alright, albeit a little bit boring, but the torsos were either reused from previous lines or unbelievably cursed in their combined modes. And the only other non-beast deluxe wasn't just a hollow mess, but also caked in political controversy. The leaders were alright though. But yeah, 2018 wasn't the best time to be a collector, or at least from my perspective it wasn't. Elita 1's combined mode pretty squarely falls into that category. There's just so much wrong with it. First off, the proportions are all f***ed. Yes, it's funny to laugh at the pregnancy gimmick that the deluxes had, but when it's tooled into the combined mode, it quickly loses all its comedy. And then from every angle other than the front, it's incredibly hollow. Much like Silverbolt, the head sits on a panel, however said panel barely covers up any of the hollowness. It feels incredibly disjointed from the rest of the body. Then you've just got the feet hanging here without any of it folding away. Then you've got the legs that are even thinner than Silverbolt's. Then you've got the hollow back section, like legitimately. Where's ridiculous back kibble when you need it? The only element I actually like is the head sculpt. It's essentially a bigger version of the robot head, only with better sculpt work. It's also more expressive, albeit only slightly. It's got a sterner demeanor, and if they'd used this in the robot mode, I feel it could have done a great job. But that really isn't enough to save this thing. It's incredibly bad. To the point where it's not even funny. It's just frustrating. I do get why it's ended up as such though. Under the assumption that this was designed for Elita 1 and not Starscream, Hasbro at the time was pretty bad at designing fembots. Then put in a whole third mode and try to homage Dorito Scream because there are plans to reuse the mold as that. Yeah, sacrifices are going to be made. Especially considering the line this came from. Honestly, I'm never going to use this combined mode ever again as long as I live, provided I'm not forced to use this in a video. That's probably the same for most collectors out there, aside from the few select insane souls who somehow want to complete Oratha. Although on a quick tangent, I find it hilarious how the first name for the Elita combiner was Elita Infinite, spelled with a 1. That's got to be one of the douchiest combiner names I've ever come across. But back on topic, yes, this combined mode is bad, but I think it's easily ignorable. If I can ignore most of the awful combined modes of the Power Core combiners, I can easily do the same for Elita 1 over here. If you absolutely want to fix the combined mode, much like previous examples, there are upgrade kits you can purchase. I don't know if they're still available, but if they are, the option is there. But take a look at the remaining two modes. One is flawed, but still quite fun, and the other is done remarkably well for the era it came out in. That's something I feel needs to be taken into consideration when deciding which Elita 1 you want in your collection. Do you want a figure that has two really bad modes, or one that has a brilliant one disappointing one, and one easily ignored terrible one? I honestly think the answer is quite clear, but I'm not you. I can't put myself inside your head, so ultimately you may have a different outlook on this. You may even want to buy the Netflix version so Elita 1 gets more figures in the future. That's fair, that's what I'm doing for Double Dealer. But honestly, as far as Elita 1 is concerned, my stance is decided. I just can't bring myself to buy the awful newer version. It's simply gone too far. But that's okay, as bad as it is, I already have a wonderful version to mess with. Faults and all, this figure means something to me as a shining light amongst a mountain of shit. As many potential newer incarnations we could get in the future, nothing can take that away from her. Now, if this figure didn't have the combined mode, I could have easily given her a 4 out of 5, even with the issues with the jet mode. But considering she has to contend with that, I unfortunately categorically have to take a point off. But putting that aside, the jet mode, although flawed, does interesting things, and this robot mode is absolutely lush. But maybe even then she's still not good enough for you. Well, I've got good news for you. At the time of recording, Sam's Forge is currently working on his own version, which turns into a freightliner, but still goes for a more siege-accurate look. And come the f*** on, who doesn't love this alt mode? My point is that even if you don't like this particular figure, there are options out there. You don't have to settle for what's currently on the market. Elita 1 is a core member of the G1 cast, and I honestly don't think me skipping the Netflix version is going to deprive her of figures in the future. So maybe you'll buy the Netflix version to show Hasbro that you want more Elita 1. But to be honest, for me, I don't think that's necessary. And I'm quite happy with what I already have.